Alrighty, so the next team we're going to talk about in the moving forward series is DC United. And just like many of these teams that is near the bottom of the table, DC United is another team that is in a transitional period. Although what's interesting about this team is that next season they're definitely embarking in a new era, and that for the first time in over a decade, they get to ask the question that pretty much every team had to ask and to have an answer heading into the off season, which is who exactly is going to take charge of this team as a head coach. Now, before we kind of get to talk about that, let's talk about this season of how they finished. Well, they finished with a record of 5-6-12 and had 21 points. They only scored 25 goals this season, although a lot of that came in the last couple of games, and that most of the goals that they scored or came in the late playoff push that they had in the last couple of games. But for the first couple of games, or at least for the majority of this season, they were really struggling in terms of the goal scoring department. They also struggle on the defensive end too by allowing 41 goals this season, and the goal differential is -16, and they finished 13 in the Eastern Conference, although they were also part of that five-team battle for the last two spot in the Eastern Conference on decision day. And unfortunately, not only the fact that other resort didn't go their way, but they also lost their decision day resort against Montreal, and that pretty much sealed their fate in terms of getting eliminated in the Eastern Conference. Now, MVP of this team, I don't know. Like, there isn't really a big standout player in this DC United team, and if anything, I think a lot of these players on this team either underachieve or they never fulfilled the potential that they thought that they would, and also most of the star player that they had heading into this season basically end up on the injury reserve list, and pretty much was on the injury reserve list for majority of the season. So yeah, I don't really know who exactly is the standout player on this team. If I had to pick, I'm guessing I'll just go with Donovan Pines, because he basically scored the second most goal on this team, and at times he was probably one of their best player on the defensive end. And that, talking about how he's the second top goal scorer of this team, yeah, when your defender is your second top goal scorer, you know you have some huge issue in terms of the attacking end. The most disappointing player, there's definitely a lot to go with. I could have easily gone with Julian Gresso, with the way that, yes, even though he is actually the top assist leader on this team, and he also scored the fourth most goal on this team, this has been a huge regression in terms of this season, and compared to his time with DC United compared to Atlanta. Like, I remember when DC got Julian Gresso in the beginning of the season, I thought that was a huge steal, and that they were going to get a player that is just going to really help them into the attacking end. But unfortunately, it has been a very disappointing season for him, no doubt. But the only reason why I decided not to put him as the most disappointing player, and that he could have been an easy player to include on the most disappointing player list, is the fact that he's been playing the wrong position. Like, Ben Olson basically decided to put him pretty much in a position that he's not comfortable playing in. And when you're even as good as a player that is Julian Gresso is, and even though I know he was very versatile when he was with Atlanta, when you decide not to put him in the right position to succeed, yeah, that usually means that there's going to be failure that is going to happen. So I kind of sympathize him in terms of that, and that's why for my most disappointing player, I'm going to choose Yamil Assad over Julian Gresso. And the reason why I think Assad has been disappointing this season, well, actually, I remember when DC decided to let go of Yamil Assad and decided to not sign him on a permanent deal, I thought that was a mistake, because he was very, very good when he was with this team the first time, and that I thought he was a player that they could definitely think about signing him on a permanent deal, but they decided not to do it. And that the second time when they decided to bring him back, I thought that was also a great idea, because this would be a guy that can really replace what Lucho Acosta was with this DC team, and it turns out he was nothing like what he was the first time when he was with this team, and that it's just been a really disappointing year for him, and that hopefully next season he can potentially bounce back, because this just 3 goals this season and 2 assists. And again, even though I know he is the second top goal scorer and he's the 4th top assist leader on this team, when you have that kind of number, that is definitely not a number you want to see from your number 10 and a guy that you expect to be the main playmaker of this team. Now, talk about the top goal scored at number 1, and just like how some of these struggling team in the bottom of the table that struggle in terms of goal scoring, you expect that the top goal scored is probably not going to get a lot of goals, and you would be right in DC case, as Ola Kamara is the top goal scored on this team, but he only scored 4 goals this season with this team. Yamil Assad and Donovan Pines both tied with 3 goals, followed by Julian Gresso and Federico Higuain tied with 2 goals. Top assist leader, you got Edison Flores and Julian Gresso with 3 assists apart. Felipe with 2 assists alongside Yamil Assad, and Jordi Reyna rounds out the list with 1 assist to this team. So what went right for DC in this season? Well, not much that kind of went right for this team, but at least if you ask the DC United fans, what one thing that went right is that at least the Ben Olsen era is over now. Like, for the past couple of years, I have heard a lot of DC fans that don't want to see Ben Olsen coaching this team anymore, of how bad he has been, and that it was always kind of his time with the way that how this season gone. It looked like his time with DC United was kind of coming to close, and that I thought maybe it was going to either come to close during that horrendous run, or the fact that it's probably at the end of the season, but they eventually did fire him near the last part of the season. And yeah, the 10-year reign of Ben Olsen taking charge of this team is now officially over, although there is still a chance that he could be still part of this DC team, because even though DC United basically decided to fire Ben Olsen, they basically said that, yeah, we're going to fire you as the head coach, but since you've been with this team pretty much throughout your entire career as a player and a head coach, we're going to give you another position in the front office role if you're interested. And so far I've heard nothing about whether or not if Ben Olsen is interested in that front office role, but if he is, then yeah, he is still going to be with this team. And I guess it wouldn't be the worst thing. I mean, unless if that front office role has a lot to say with some of the moves and some of the transfer that this team is going to go, I don't think DC fans are going to be that disappointed to see Ben Olsen staying with this team, because again, he's been with this team pretty much throughout his entire career, and he's considered one of the best DC player to ever play for this team, and also he's been head coaching this team for over a decade. Like, when you're part of a team that's pretty much in your entire career and your head coaching career, and pretty much him being part of this team for 20 plus years, there definitely is no way the fact that he's going to decide to move on from this team, and that I'm expected he's probably going to be back in this team in the front office role. Now, the other thing that went right for this team is that they had a late playoff push, and that that I thought they were going to do it in the latter part of the season when they were winning 3 games in a row and had that 4-game unbeaten run, and that if they would have made the playoffs this season, I think this would have been probably the most impressive late playoff push I've seen a team ever done in MLS history. And I would say this is even more impressive than what they did back in 2018, when, remember, that was the year when they basically had to go on the road for a very long time, and that basically they were waiting for Audi Field to finish, and once that stadium is finished, boy, they went on a crazy run where they pretty much won 12 out of the 15 games that was at Audi Field, and they basically made the playoffs as a 4th seed. But this was even more impressive because it was much more shortened period, and that they looked like they were dead and buried a couple weeks ago, but they almost did it with a late playoff push, and having become one of the hottest team down the stretch. I think if this team would have made the playoffs, this would have been a team that you do not want to play for, with the way that anytime when you have a team that is coming into the playoffs red hot, those are always the team that is the toughest to try to eliminate it, because they have all the confidence in the world heading into the playoffs. So what went wrong for DC United? Well, a lot of things kind of went wrong with this team, but probably one of the biggest one is that they took too long to let go of Ben Olson. And I thought, remember how during this season when they had that halftime debacle where Ben Olson decided to substitute Russell Canals into the game in the second half, only to find out that he was actually ineligible, and that there was a lot of confusion that was happening during that game. Like, if you can't even get your team sheet correctly, you probably don't deserve to stay as a head coach of an MLS team. And I thought that was also kind of the last straw for him, but it only took a couple of weeks before the DC finally decided to pull the trigger and put Ben Olson on the chopping block. But that being said, I think if they would have just pulled the trigger during that halftime debacle and that substitution debacle in that game against Atlanta, I think they probably would have made the playoffs, because as soon as Ben Olson was no longer with this team, you can see how much the players was re-energized and they were going on a late playoff push, which only tells me that clearly the players were not playing for Ben Olson, and that this is a team that could have made the playoffs if they would have got rid of him sooner than so late that they did during this season. The other thing that went wrong is none other than injury crisis, and I talked about this earlier where some of their best player suffered back-breaking injury early this season. I think Paul Arriola basically started the trend with the fact that he suffered what looked like was a season-ending ACL injury, but then it was kind of shocking the fact that he was back with this team at the very last game. But unfortunately, some other players on that team, I know Edison Flores also suffered a long-term injury. Felipe was another one that suffered a torn ACL. So yeah, they were definitely having some injury crisis, not only on the attacking end but also on the midfielder. And it's kind of explaining why they were struggling in terms of scoring goals, because they don't really have a lot of depth in terms of the attacking end, and there's not really a lot of guys that can just step in and fill in the shoes of some of their star players that went down with a long-term injury, and expect this team to still be as dynamic on the attack when those star players are on this one. And that also kind of brings me into the third point, where their attack was non-existent at some games. And when I mean non-existent, I mean that game against NYCFC where they only become the second team and become the first team ever in MLS history to register 0 shots on the stat chart and still able to pick up points. Which, on one part, that's definitely a great achievement, the fact that they were still able to get a point despite the fact that they had 0 shot in the entire game. But at the same time, that is definitely not a record you want to have, with the way that how on earth do you not register a single shot in over for 90 minutes? Like, especially nowadays with how much MLS is more focused on the attacking end, it's quite shocking the fact that I would ever see a game where we're going to have one team to register 0 shot in the entire 90 minutes of the game. And that one was even at home too, against NYCFC, and it also wasn't like DC was playing a really tough opponent. I mean, NYCFC was a decent opponent, but it was not like, let's say, Toronto or Seattle or even LAFC that they're facing. I mean, that just makes it even more baffling, the fact that they had that kind of stat line. And really, that was a time where their attack was basically non-existent whatsoever, with them not having a single shot throughout the full 90 minutes. Now, moving forward for this DC team, obviously the main talking point for this team heading into the offseason is who exactly is going to be the head coach for this team. As I mentioned earlier in my News of the Week episode, they add in 2 more candidates in terms of earlier mentioning. They have already narrowed down to 4 candidates as the next head coach of this team. They added David Wagner and Eddie Howe into the candidate spot, which I don't know if either of those 2 names that they added is going to be the head coach of that team, because both of those head coach have already said that they have no intention of coming to MLS, and they are expected to pursue another opportunity in Europe, which pretty much brings us to those 4 candidates that I mentioned mentioned before, whether are they going to go with their current interim head coach Chad Ashton, or are they going to be go with a head coach that will definitely be a watershed moment for MLS by bringing Jill Ellis to becoming the first head coach, or the first woman head coach in MLS history, or are they going to go with kind of a lower league USL kind of head coach in Israel Henriksen from the Seattle Sounders reserve team in the USL, that is Tacoma Defiance, or are they actually even going to go with Chris Armas, which again, as I said before, that would be one of the most weirdest manager acquisition I've ever seen a team gone. Because imagine decide to pick a head coach that formerly coach your rival and also formerly play for your rival throughout the majority of his career, and he was also a legend with the Red Bulls for that long time, and now he's coaching DC United. Like, the irony in that will definitely be very, very big, in that, you know, we shall see who exactly is going to be the head coach for this team, and I expect they're going to take their time in terms of making the decision, because, you know, the next season, we still don't know when exactly next year is actually going to start, and that although I know that they're going to try their best to take their time to think this over with, because this is a big decision that they have to make, they don't want to wait it too long, where we're near the beginning of the season and they started to appoint a new head coach, because that, when you decide to do that, then basically that new head coach doesn't have time to get to know his team, and things will kind of unravel very easily if they decided to go to that route. Now, the other thing moving forward from them is that they will get most of their attacking pieces back from injury, which, you know, if that's the case heading into next season, I expect the attack should be much better than it was this season. I mean, this season they could use the excuse, the fact that they had to deal with a lot of injury on the attack. Next year, if that attack is still struggling and they still have all those star player back from injury, there's really no excuse anymore of how things have gone, and that there could be definitely some serious question about that attack if that is the case. And also, I would also kind of add the fact that maybe they need to also get some more attacking pieces, and that they still need some depth in terms of this team, because you can clearly see this season when they don't have some of their star players on the attacking end, they just kind of have no attack whatsoever and just have no depth whatsoever on that attacking end. And finally, moving forward for them, they need a number 9. I know this past season they have tried their best to fix that issue. You know, just recently they brought Jordi Reyna and also Rivas into that team, and while they of course decided to bring those guys in during the middle of the season, I'm not quite sure if both of those guys are going to stay with this team next year, especially Jordi Reyna, who, you know, this season he is, well, next season he's actually not under contract, which means that if that is the case, and knowing the fact that he didn't really do much with this DC team, I'm guessing they're probably just going to let him walk, and that move that they made all the way back in October was always kind of like a rental, and kind of just some emergency move that they have to make because they were so thin in that number 9 position. So yeah, I think this offseason they need to get another number 9. I might even say that maybe Ola Kamara might not be back with this team. Like, I know next season he is under contract, but you can see he has really regressed heading into, or he has really regressed last season with him only scoring 4 goals with this team. So I think that not only the fact that they need depth in terms of that number 9 spot, but they might even need to think about signing a new number 9 and a player that will be kind of like a Wayne Rooney type of player for their team in terms of that striker position. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it for my moving forward series for DC United. If you're a DC fan, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this? What do you think went right with your team? What went wrong? And moving forward, what's going to happen with this team, as there's no doubt that this team is embarking in a new era heading into next season. But until then, hope you guys enjoy this video, and I will see you guys next time.